He came back for the tray and, to their surprise, climbed into the well and disappeared. Alfred whistled to himself. "I think this is our opportunity. Let's follow him." Alfred reached the well first. He could hear the sound of Rodolfo's boots on the stone steps as he went deeper into the well. At some point, they seemed to just fade away. Alfred looked in, but all he could see was a black hole. "I say, I don't fancy getting in there. Looks like the way down to hell." Ernest struck a match and held it over the hole. They could make out spiral steps built on the side of the well. There was nothing to hold on to, and the steps looked wet and slippery, so if either of them fell, he would almost certainly go hurtling down to a sure death. Ernest got into the mouth of the well. "Be careful. The steps are all wet and slimy." Step by step, they climbed down into the darkness, feeling their way as best they could by leaning against the well wall. Suddenly, Alfred saw Ernest fall. For a moment, he thought he had seen the last of his friend, and he expected to hear the fatal splash. Instead, he heard Ernest's voice coming from the well. Then he realized what had happened. There was a large hole in the wall, and Ernest had fallen into it, and was now lying on the floor of what, by the looks of it, was a passageway, which led somewhere underground. "Are you all right, old chap?" "Well, just about. I thought I was on my way to meet the Count for a moment. Where the devil are we?" "Your guess is as good as mine. The home of the vampire bat, I should think. Hold on a tick. I can just make out a dim light at the end there." Ernest got to his feet and felt his way along the passage to a door, which was slightly open. Inside, they could hear Rodolfo's voice and the grunts of some kind of animal. Ernest pushed the door slightly. "There's only one way to find out. Let's go." He opened the door just enough to see what was happening. Rodolfo had his back to them and was facing someone sitting on a chair. He appeared to have a spoon in one hand, feeding a baby. The room was warm and comfortable, with expensive Persian carpets on the floor. Rodolfo got up to put more wood on the fire, revealing the ugliest creature they had ever seen. One side of its face was twisted and shapeless, and its arms and whole body were all bent and moving out of control. Uneaten food and meaningless sounds were coming out of its mouth. Alfred could not help exclaiming, "Good heavens, what is that?" Rodolfo was speaking to the creature as if it understood what he was saying, but could not reply. Alfred pulled Ernest's arm. "I think we ought to go." Rodolfo must have sensed someone was there because he let out a wild cry and started to run towards them. "You devils! Father said I should trust you because you are English gentlemen, but everybody hates the Dracula name, and you're no different. You want a story for your newspaper. You don't care about the great family Dracula. Well, I'm going to kill you." Rodolfo reached the two men and was about to lift Alfred into the air, when Ernest threw his bolas, which was made of thick string with 3 metal balls tied to the ends. The bolas went right around Rodolfo's legs. Alfred was thrown into the air, and Rodolfo fell forward onto the floor. Ernest threw the end of a piece of rope to Alfred. "Here, grab the end of this and tie him up before he recovers." "Bravo, Ernest, old fellow! Where on earth did you learn that little trick? Didn't I tell you I spent 3 months with the rebels in Argentina fighting the dictator? I brought that little fellow back with me." Between the two of them, they managed to tie up the struggling Rodolfo. Ernest was afraid he was going to break the rope, but it soon became clear that it was too strong for him. When they had finally got him under control, Alfred started to speak. Now, Rodolfo, old fellow, I'm frightfully sorry to have to do this, but you simply must understand. We're here to help Idegu. No, you're just like the rest. Look, old fellow, why do you think the Count asked us over here? Now I think you'd better tell us the whole thing. The creature in the corner let out an animal cry. I suppose it was he who was making the screams in the night. Who is he? I suppose it is a he? Rodolfo said nothing, just boiled with anger. Then he spoke. Well, you know now, and I cannot kill you, so I might as well tell you the whole story. That is the Count's son. The Count's son? Yes, he is 45 years old. He should have died, but... Hold on a tick. 45? But the Countess died 45 years ago. You mean that she died giving birth to that gentleman over there? Yes. Radu is the heir to the Dracula estate. He should now be Count Dracula. Our Adu? That means handsome, doesn't it? Rather ironical. Naturally, the Count did not want the world to know about Radu. It would be a great shame for the family, but he felt great guilt for keeping him here in this hole. But Radu doesn't know any better. Well, it looks as if you've let the cat out of the bag, Rodolfo. But don't worry, your secret will be safe with us. I won't even mention it in my article, I promise. Now, one thing puzzles us. Who is this Dr. Magorsky? Dr. Magorsky is an evil man, but the Count was a naive man and trusted him. I think he killed her. Killed the Countess? By bleeding her. This is what he does, to make people better. I see. Fascinating. Oh, and one last little question, old boy. Now that we've got you in this, difficult position, so to speak. That was you we saw on the Count's horse the other night, wearing his cloak and hood? Rodolfo was silent. Then, hesitatingly, he replied, No. Are you sure you weren't sleep riding, old fellow? Because if it wasn't you, I daren't think who it was, unless it was the Count himself. Now you must trust us. We can work together and sort this whole nasty business out. Our job is to clear the Dracula name, and that's exactly what we will do. All right, I will help you. Oh, what a jolly good fellow. Did you understand that, Ernest? Rodolfo is going to help. I think we can untie him now. Are you sure we can trust him? He could throw both of us into the well with one arm. Well, perhaps you'd better keep your little thingy handy just in case. They first unwound the bolus and then the ropes from around his arms. He made no attempt to attack them. Alfred sighed with relief. Well, I don't know about you two, but I'm starving. How about breakfast? When Ernest and Alfred were having breakfast, Alfred was still unsure of the situation. 343-6. There are still a lot of questions unanswered, aren't there, old boy? I mean, who was that chappie on the horse? Now, we don't believe in ghosts, or do we? I'm not sure we can trust Rodolfo. He may have been lying, or at least not telling us the whole truth. Might he still throw us down the well or something? Oh, no. Rodolfo's a fine fellow. I think we need to investigate the doctor. All this bleeding. Nasty business. Well, in that case, I suggest that after breakfast, we get old Gregory to pop us into the village so that we can get to the bottom of this Magorsky fellow. Ah, Rodolfo. A superb breakfast as usual. I hope you didn't just accidentally drop a few spoonfuls of cyanide into the coffee. Rodolfo did not reply or smile. Funny about foreigners, they can't take a joke. They decided to go straight to the doctor's house and face him. For some reason, Rodolfo insisted on driving them there. After a 2-hour journey, they arrived at an iron gate leading into a large estate surrounded by a tall glass-topped wall. A well-kept drive led up to the doctor's house. On looking out of the window of the carriage, Ernest was surprised to see a large house with at least 20 rooms. "Take a look at that, old boy. He's not doing too badly for a country doctor. A house like that must be worth a fortune." The door was opened by a servant. After a long wait, the doctor, who was still an extremely handsome man, with long silver hair brushed back on both sides of his head, came into the room. Surprisingly, he spoke excellent English. "I believe we've met before, gentlemen, under less happy circumstances. You're English, I believe." "Yes, doctor. We're doing a spot of investigating for the late Count. They tell me you've been asking questions that have been upsetting some of the villagers." "Not at all, doctor. People have been very happy to tell us all they know. It seems that these rumors about the Count having a taste for human blood are totally unfounded. I don't know who you've been talking to, gentlemen, but I can assure you that the Count was, and I believe still is, a vampire. You forget, gentlemen, I was his doctor." "You say still is. Do you mean to say that you don't believe that the Count is dead? Or do you believe in ghosts?" "I believe he died, yes, but I also believe in his power to come back from the dead. In fact, I believe that vampires are humans who have died and come back to Earth." "Very interesting, doctor. But you say the Count was also a vampire in real life?" "Yes, the Count had very rare powers. I once examined his teeth at some length, and—" At that moment a shout was heard from the hall, and all 7 feet of Rodolfo came through the door into the sitting room. "That man is a liar. He is the vampire, not the Count. Tell them how you—" The doctor looked at Rodolfo with an ironic smile on his face. "You can't prove it. The Count never recognized you as Hisson." "Maybe not publicly, but I'm going to prove how you blackmailed the Count so you would keep his secret. You were the only person who knew about Radu." "Rubbish! Nonsense! I can get all the villagers to say how you forced large sums of money out of them and threatened to kill them if they did not pay." The doctor began to laugh hysterically. "This man is mad, absolutely mad. He needs to be locked up. And if he doesn't shut up soon, I shall call my men and have him taken away." During this confrontation, Ernest and Alfred just sat and watched, not knowing who was telling the truth. Suddenly, Rodolfo came towards the doctor and took him by the shirt collar. He probably would have broken his neck if Alfred had not stopped him. "Gentlemen, there's no need to fight like animals. We're all civilized here." "Civilized? This doctor is an animal. He has killed thousands by bleeding them to death." "Lies. Prove it, you monster." Suddenly, Rodolfo calmed down. "Yes, Dr. Lover, I will prove it." "You can prove nothing." "Yes, I can. Before the Count died, he left me his diary, in which he wrote everything. When you killed the Countess with your so-called medicines and your bleeding, not one day went by that the Count did not write down everything. How you blackmailed him, how you got rich by threatening the poor and sick, how you used the vampire bat to do your dirty work for you, how everybody hates you and fears you. No one would believe it. They all think the Count was the vampire. It's his word against mine. You know very well that if it's a question of your word against his, the people will believe his. The people loved the Count and never really believed the rumors." Suddenly, a fearful screeching was heard from the next room. Everybody except the doctor froze. "It's nothing, gentlemen. It's my falcon. He wishes to go hunting." As soon as Ernest heard the screech, he showed great excitement. "Alfred, old chap, this is the moment I've been waiting for." Ernest walked excitedly to the door and was about to open it when the doctor shouted at him, "Don't open that door unless you want to die, Lord Ernest. I have specially trained them to go straight for the neck. Doctor, you don't think I would come all the way from England and not see the vampire bat in the light of day? After all, I am a specialist. I warned you." No sooner had Ernest opened the door than a loud flapping of wings and the screeching of a starving bat was heard, and an ugly creature with pointed wings and a squashed nose, with black hair sticking out of it, flew wildly at Ernest. Alfred screamed and ran to fight off the vicious creature, but by the time he had reached his friend, the bat had already got its teeth in his neck. To Alfred's surprise, Ernest just stood there while the creature got its fill from his neck. Alfred did not know what to do. Soon, the bat drew out its teeth from Ernest's neck and sat on his shoulder like a parrot or a tame bird. "Do you know, Alfred, old boy, I think this is the most exciting moment of my life. How many people back in England can say that they came in such close contact with a Desmodus rotundus? But won't it kill you, dear boy?" "Good heavens, no. Of course, if I were one of the doctor's patients and it fed off me 3 times a day, I wouldn't last long." The doctor stood in admiration, listening to the man talking about his bats so casually. "A beautiful creature, doctor, but also a deadly one, if you let it be." "You have them well trained, doctor. You don't mind if I see the rest of the family?" At that, Ernest went into the doctor's laboratory and looked up at the ceiling. Sure enough, hanging upside down on a wooden bar were 4 more vampire bats. Alfred, by now, had wrapped a scarf around his neck and was holding it tightly with both hands. "How many people have you killed, doctor, to keep your little family alive?" "Yes, they are my family. I love them more than any human being because they love me with all their heart. They are faithful, not like women who love you today and leave you tomorrow. All those people, they were going to die anyway. I couldn't save them. Nobody could." "How can you be so sure, doctor? I think we should let the police decide on that. Don't you think, Alfred?" "Absolutely, old chap. I suggest we go right now." At that, they turned and left the doctor, who was shouting nonsense after them. "You can't do anything to me. They're just peasants. They're all afraid of me. I have all the power." As they reached the carriage, Ernest turned to the doctor. "Well, goodbye, doctor. It was a pleasure. We shall meet again soon. Oh, and one more thing. You won't need to feed one member of your family tonight." Yay! When they were in the carriage, Alfred felt a little better and let his hands go from his neck, but he seemed very concerned by the 2 pink spots on Ernest's neck. "Are you all right, old chap?" Horrifying experience. "On the contrary, dear boy, it was like a gentle kiss. You should try it sometime." "I think G11 give it a miss, old fellow. I11 stick to the female kind. Now, what I'm worried about is what the doctor will do to get his hands on the Count S diary. He'll stop at nothing. He'll check my Derringer just in case. I think we'll be needing bullet points. It. By the time they left the doctor's, it had begun to snow, and by the look of the dark clouds, there was going to be a storm. So they decided not to go to the police that night. Anyway, Alfred wished to examine the Count's diaries first to make sure that Rodolfo had got his facts correct. Alfred had 2 things on his mind that he had not had a chance to talk to Ernest about. He leaned towards Ernest so that he could be heard above the noise of the carriage and the rising storm. "Did you notice, Ernest, that Rodolfo called Migorsky Dr. Lover?" "I'm afraid I missed that, old boy." "Why? Do you think that the doctor is the lover the Count mentioned in his letter?" Suddenly the sound of horses approaching the carriage was heard, and then a shot rang out. Ernest quickly stuck his head out of the window. Through the falling snow, he could see 3 riders. "I think we're being attacked by the doctor's men. I hope you're a good shot, old boy, because it's the only gun we've got." Rodolfo was now going faster, and the carriage was rolling dangerously from side to side. Another shot rang out, and they heard a cry from Rodolfo. At that, Ernest started climbing out of the window, much to Alfred's concern. "Be careful, old boy. They're out to kill." "I'm afraid you're going to have to join me, dear fellow. You don't stand a chance of hitting any of them in here." So, both men climbed out onto the carriage roof. Rodolfo had been shot in the arm, but was still able to drive the horses. After nearly being thrown off the carriage 3 times, Alfred finally managed to get onto the carriage roof. He lay down on his stomach and aimed. His first shot knocked one of the riders off his horse. Ernest looked around in surprise. "I say, well done! You never told me you were such an ace." The other 2 riders followed for a short distance and then dropped behind. Alfred relaxed, but was not happy. This doctor will stop at nothing to keep the world from finding out the truth. I think we've got a rather unpleasant few days ahead of us. Jolly good show. I was beginning to think things were getting rather boring. Say yay. They reached Dracula Castle without any further adventures. Rodolfo was bleeding badly, but Ernest, who knew quite a lot about first aid, cleaned and dressed the wound. While this was going on, Alfred thought it was a good opportunity to get some straight answers from Rodolfo. "Rodolfo, did I hear you say that the Count was your father? And if so, why are you pretending to be his servant?" "I should have told you everything from the beginning, but I have learnt to trust nobody. I am the son of Mania. The Count married her secretly. He brought a priest from far away so that no one would know. But the Count never treated me like a son, more like a servant. That made me bitter, and I hated the Count for that, but I loved him as my father." I see. Now what about Migorsky? Why did you call him Dr. Lover?" "It is a name he hates. When he was young, he loved a beautiful woman from Vilcea, and they were going to get married. But she left him for another man, a rich man from the town, and after that people made fun of him by calling him the Lover. It was that which made the doctor hate women, particularly young and beautiful women. I am sure now that the Lover killed the Countess." "Doesn't the Count mention it in his diaries?" "No. You see, the Count was such a kind man that he could not believe that others could be evil. He did not know how jealous the doctor was of him. He did not even hate the doctor for blackmailing him. The Count was the kindest man. But you say he treated you badly." "Yes. You see, my mother is not an aristocrat. She is nobody, and so I too am nobody, but I have the Dracula blood in my veins. That is hard to accept." "Now this is all jolly interesting, Rodolfo, but who was that fellow on the horse the other night pretending to be the Count?" Rodolfo looked at the ground, and his pale, bony face went red. "I lied to you. It was me. I have a confession to make. I helped the doctor spread these rumors about the Count. I would ride the Count's horse through the village whenever the doctor told me to, so that everybody would think it was the Count. What I did was terrible, but I wanted to hurt the Count for the way he treated me. And it appears that you did. Well, there's no point in crying over spilt milk. The important thing is to keep those diaries safe for the police and try and prove that you are the Count's son. Does he mention it anywhere in his diaries? Number I have read them all. I can't believe that if the Count was such a kind man, he would not recognize you as his son. We've got to search the castle high and low. Ernest, do you have any ideas where the Count could have hidden a letter or a will or something? Ernest, who was warming himself in front of the fire, looked thoughtful. Well, it was your idea really, old boy. You thought the Count's cane might be hollow. Yes, of course. I'd completely forgotten. Deliberately, perhaps. You don't share my interest in coffins, do you, old chap? So it looks as if we've got work to do tonight. In this weather? Sometimes, Alfred, you surprise me. You call yourself a reporter, and yet you like putting things off. Yes, tonight. Not that I think we'll see the vampire bat, I'm afraid. It's too cold. Well, at least that's one good thing. 4E. After supper, they again set out with spades. This time Rodolfo came with them, though he had a great fear of ghosts. The snow was falling in large flakes, and the wind was bitterly cold. By the time they reached the cemetery, everything was so white that they could see their way without lamps. It took them about half an hour to dig down to the Count's coffin. At the sound of his spade on the coffin, Rodolfo jumped out of the grave. I am sorry, Sir Alfred, but the rest you must do alone. I agree with you, old fellow. I can't stand this part. To tell you the truth, I just keep my eyes closed. I leave it all to Ernest. He enjoys it. The snow was falling so fast that already a white layer covered the top of the coffin. Ernest was removing the lid. I wonder if we'll see the end of my dream? Have the white fingers started to appear then? Ernest laughed and pulled off the lid. Ernest could not believe his eyes. The Count's face seemed younger and more alive than ever. And the eyes had opened again. For a moment, he thought the Count was going to speak. Alfred, can you help me turn the Count? I can't find the cane. Do I have to? They both lifted the Count over, and underneath found the cane. That's funny. I thought I left the cane on top of him. Ah, well, let's see if all this was a waste of time or not. Ernest began to unscrew the handle. When he had finished, he turned it over and tapped the end. Sure enough, a piece of thick paper fell out the end. Bingo! What does it say on the top, Alfred? I can only just see, but... Yes? Last will and testament, I think. Wonderful. Let's put the Count back to rest, hopefully for the last time. When they had got him laid on his back, Ernest noticed something very strange. Good heavens, his eyes have closed, and his face. What about it? It actually looks dead this time, but it's as if he's smiling. If I believed in ghosts, I'd swear that he knew everything that has gone on in the last few days. But you don't, do you, Ernest? Back at the castle, Rodolfo immediately went to tell his old mother the news, and they all gathered around the fire, while Alfred read the will, translating it for Ernest as he went. In this, my last will and testament, I wish to undo a wrong I committed many yean ago. I married a good and kind woman below my position, my excuse being that, like all men, I needed human warmth and comfort. My greatest crime was being ashamed of it and never recognizing the fruit of that marriage, my son Rodolfo. In this will, I ask his forgiveness and leave everything to him, declaring that he has the right to call himself Count Dracula. As for my firstborn, the unfortunate Radu, I know that Rodolfo will take care of him as long as he lives. I have taken this will to my grave, with the knowledge that if it is ever found, it will be because the Dracula name has been cleared of all the lies spread by that evil doctor lover Magorsky. I wish to thank Alfred Sackville Jones and Lord Ernest de Boy for helping my son Rodolfo to get what is rightfully his. I can now rest in peace. Count Vlad Dracula. Alfred looked up from the handwritten letter with the Dracula seal and the Countess' elaborate signature at the bottom. Well, Rodolfo, old fellow, we shall have to call you Count from now on. Rodolfo was so overjoyed that he got up and lifted his ancient mother into the air and kissed her 100 times on her wrinkled old face so that she actually smiled. Gregory, too, was jumping up and down, doing some sort of strange Romanian dance. Having put his mother down, Rodolfo then came and gave Alfred and Ernest kisses on both cheeks. May I suggest, Count, that we open one of the late Count's excellent bottles of German wine? I think this calls for a celebration. So the 5 of them celebrated to the early hours. They even got Ernest to join in singing some traditional Romanian songs. Of course, Alfred knew that many dangers lay ahead, but he did not wish to spoil the fun. Say. A. Next morning, as usual, Alfred first said good morning to the portrait of the Count, whose cheeks were all rosy red, as if he too had drunk a little too much the night before. Then he looked out of the window over the castle walls across to the river and down Dracula Valley. The storm was over, but the snow was at least 2 feet deep. Ernest was still fast asleep. Now that he had no coffins to visit or vampire bats to see, the exciting part was over for him. Alfred shook him. Wake up, old boy. Alfred, really, why do you always have to interrupt my dream at the most exciting moment? I can see I'll never get to the end. Come on, we've got a long day ahead of us. First, we've got to bring these documents to the authorities. And I'm sure that the doctor's men are already on the road and will probably do anything to stop us. The snow was too deep for the carriage, so Rodolfo rode Warrior, while Alfred and Ernest took a carriage horse each. As they were not sure that they would be returning to the castle, they took a bag full of their belongings and said goodbye to Mania and Gregory, who both had tears in their eyes. Alfred paid one last visit to their room and said goodbye to the portrait on the wall. He was almost certain he saw the Count's lips move. As they rode out of Dracula's castle, the silence was immense. All that could be heard was the muffled sounds of the river near the cemetery where the waterfall was. About a mile out, Alfred turned to Rodolfo. If the doctor's men try to attack us, where is the most likely spot? Either where the valley narrows, or where we have to cross the river about a mile out of Vilcea. They said little, just kept their eyes on the hills and trees around them, where a man with a gun might be hiding. The doctor's men were not waiting at the narrow pass, which surprised Rodolfo, and he wondered whether the doctor was going to attack them after all. Alfred, however, was sure that he would, and so, when they were halfway across the river, he stopped. Gentlemen, get your guns ready. No sooner had he spoken than a gun appeared from behind a tree and a shot rang out. The bullet whistled past Ernest's ear. Good heavens! That was close. They jumped off their horses and ran for shelter. They could now see that there were 3 attackers. Ernest, who had more experience fighting than the others, took charge. "Rodolfo, is it possible to cross the river at any other point?" "About a half a mile farther up, but there is no road." "If you'll let me have Warrior, I'll manage it all right. You keep them busy while I approach from behind." So Ernest got up on the beautiful white horse, which was almost invisible in the snow, and rode off up the river. About half an hour later, a shot rang out, and they saw a body fall from behind one of the trees. Alfred saw his chance. "Rodolfo, let's get to the other side. Ernest won't give them any time to think about us." 2 minutes later, they were on the other side. By this time, Ernest had hit another, and the third had laid down his gun and was holding up a white handkerchief. Ernest appeared from behind a tree, followed by Warrior. Well, that wasn't too difficult. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Alfred saw a movement. It was the wounded man who was pointing his gun at Rodolfo. "Rodolfo, get down!" But it was too late. Rodolfo fell to the ground, his blood spilling onto the white snow. Ernest pointed his gun and shot the man. Ernest examined Rodolfo and found that he was still breathing, but the bullet had entered his chest and he was bleeding badly. "We've got to get him to Vilcea quickly. Alfred, throw the men's guns into the river and get that man to put the dead men onto a horse. Then let's get going." They reached Vilcea about 20 minutes later. Ernest held Rodolfo in his arms and rode into Vilcea on Warrior. At the first inn, they got Rodolfo onto a bed, and Ernest set to work, trying to save his life. Sisi, ye. 2 hours later, Ernest had managed to get the bullet out and the wound dressed. Alfred looked on in admiration. "I had no idea you were such an expert, dear boy." "Oh, did I never tell you I studied medicine for 2 years before turning to archaeology? You know, I think I would have made quite a good doctor." "I suppose it's all that blood you like, dear fellow. What are Rodolfo's chances of pulling through?" "Oh, he'll live. But it may take a few days before he can get back onto his feet." Suddenly, they heard Rodolfo's voice. "Sir Alfred, get the mayor and the police chief to come. I want witnesses." "Straight away, old fellow." Seeing Ernest's bare and bloody arms, Rodolfo realized that it was he who had saved his life. "Lord Ernest, I now owe you a life. How can I repay 9 Yidagoo? One day, Count, I'd like to spend some time at the castle just going through the archives. Would that be all right?" "Anything, Lord Ernest, anything." If say, yea, half an hour later, the mayor and the police chief arrived, and the documents were formally handed over. It was now up to the authorities to deal with Dr. Magorski. Alfred was thinking. "It looks as if our job is over, Ernest, old fellow. I'd really love to see those vampire bats again. Can't I go with the police to arrest the doctor?" "First of all, we don't know where the doctor is. He is probably hiding by now, and his main aim now will be to kill us, not Rodolfo, before we get back to England and publish everything." "Quite so, old boy. Rodolfo's in good hands, so I suggest we get out of here as quickly as possible. We have a long journey ahead of us." "I'm going to miss this place, Alfred, old fellow. It suits me. I can't altogether agree with you, old boy, but I do believe Rodolfo will make a very good count. I always thought he was a very solid chap." Alfred and Ernest said goodbye to Rodolfo, who could not thank them enough, and caught the 3:30 from Vilcea to Craiova, where they planned to pick up the train to Vienna. They, of course, had no news of the doctor, and wondered whether he would use his money and power to send a team to try to kill them. Strangely enough, it was Ernest who was most concerned. "Do you know, Alfred, old fellow, we're not home and dry yet. It was we who uncovered his evil deeds, and he's not the type who forgives easily. Do you really think he'll send some of his killers after us? Why would he bother? It's a question of pride and honor, and these foreign fellows think such things are terribly important." Alfred had great difficulty thinking of danger. He was already imagining himself back in his room in London. "What's the first thing you'll do when you get back, Ernest?" "What a question. Let me see. Yes, I think I'll open a bottle of your finest wine, dear boy. What'll you do?" "I'll go for a walk through the fog of London and stand on Tower Bridge and watch the boats go underneath." Ernest laughed. "Really, Alfred? You're such a sentimentalist." They arrived in Craiova at about 6 o'clock and had to wait an hour for their connection. They were waiting on the crowded platform when Alfred saw a man he thought he recognized. "Ernest, do you see that man over by the entrance? The one with the beard and the scar above his left eye? Does he ring a bell?" "Don't think so, old fellow. Probably my imagination." However, Alfred kept an eye on him and noticed that he too got on the train to Vienna. There was something suspicious about him. He was dressed like a man of wealth, but looked like a boxer. It was about 4:45 in the morning, and they were about halfway to Vienna when the first attempt on their lives was made. Ernest was fast asleep and snoring so loudly that he was keeping Alfred awake. The door of their cabin opened, allowing a strip of light to enter. Alfred opened his eyes for a second and saw the man with the beard. He was holding a piece of rope in his hands and was obviously intending to strangle them both. Alfred wished he had put the derringer under his pillow, and also that Ernest was not fast asleep. He decided to wait and grab the man by the legs as soon as he got close enough to the bunk bed. Alfred was about to jump when he heard the man grunt and fall to the floor of the compartment. Ernest switched on the light and looked at the man lying on the floor, apparently dead. "It looks as if I saved your life, Alfred, old fellow. It's a good thing I don't sleep as deeply as you do." "But I don't." "Don't what?" "It awake." "Snoring? Was I really?" "Sleep soundly. You were the one snoring." I was wide. Ernest looked at the body. "I'm afraid I broke his neck. Well, what can a chap do if another chap tries to strangle him in the middle of the night? I suppose we'll have to explain this mess to the guard." "I say." For the next 2 days, nothing unusual happened. It wasn't until they were outside Paris that the next attempt on their lives was made. They had got to know another passenger, a German by the name of Wolf Heinz. He said he was an ornithologist and was on his way to England to study a bird species there. Ernest, however, was quite suspicious because that particular species of bird wouldn't arrive in England for another 2 months. It all happened when they were having tea and cakes in the dining car. Herr Heinz had arrived first and had already ordered. Alfred was delighted to see the cherry cakes and tea waiting. "I say, Wolf, old chap, jolly nice of you." They sat down and Wolf offered them a cake each. Ernest noticed that they smelt strongly of almond and suspected that Wolf had put cyanide in some of them. Rather than cause a fuss, he pretended to knock the cake out of Alfred's hand. "Frightfully sorry, old fellow. How clumsy of me. Good heavens, look out there. That bird. Very unusual. What is it?" Wolf looked out of the window and tried hard to see the bird. during which time Ernest changed his cake for the one on Wolf's plate. Then he winked at Alfred so that he understood what was happening. Oh dear, it must have flown away. When he turned round, Alfred and Ernest were pretending to be finishing off their cakes, which Ernest had put into his pocket. "What lovely cakes, Wolf!" Wolf joined in and ate his. On arrival in Paris, they saw an empty coffin arrive and leave with a body in it. Ernest looked at Alfred and smiled. Poor Wolf! And they did look like awfully nice cakes. Tree umnoget na tree umnoget na tree umnoget na When they got off the train at Charing Cross, they really felt their adventure had ended. But they did not see the young man get into the cab behind them and follow them all the way. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Alfred pushed Ernest to the ground. A man was standing on the pavement, pointing a gun at them. Ernest was quite annoyed. Dear me! And I was so looking forward to a nice cup of English tea. The man in the street looked mad, his eyes moving wildly in his head. You ruined my father! You will pay for this! But by the time he had finished his last sentence, Ernest had got out his derringer and had shot him straight through the heart. They ran to the body, now lying in a pool of blood. In his pocket, Alfred found a passport with the name Nikolai Magorsky. Really, these foreign fellows are hot-blooded, aren't they? Ernest was more concerned about the body. Now, how are we going to explain this to the police? For the next 3 months, Alfred and Ernest went everywhere looking over their shoulder. But it appeared that Nikolai was the last assassin. Come on, hold out your glass, Ernest, old chap. Alfred raised his glass in the air and Ernest filled it with champagne. Well, here's to a successful end to the Dracula affair. The Globe has been awfully good. Of course, they didn't believe a word of it. But they said that even as a work of fiction it was worth publishing. Oh, well done, old fellow. Yes, we're going to call it The Real Count Dracula in 10 episodes. I have to admit that I'm going to make a fortune. Well, I must tell you, old fellow, that you're not the only one who's had some success. I'm going to have an article published in the British Bat Society magazine on the vampire bat. And I've been booked to give talks on the subject all summer. Oh, how superb! Let's drink to the late and present Count Dracula. I wonder what happened to the doctor. Probably took one of his deadly potions. He had nothing to live for. Just then there was a knock on the door, and Alfred's servant entered with a letter. Alfred opened it quickly. Ah, it's from Rodolfo. Let's see what he has to say. Dear Alfred and Ernest, I have some good and some bad news. The bad news is that my brother Radu died and was buried next to his father in the Dracula cemetery. The good news is that the doctor is dead. He was found with all the blood sucked out of him with his horrible bats standing on his body. He died as he deserved to, in the way that he killed his victims. The other good news is that I am getting married and would like you to come to my wedding. I am marrying the daughter of a count in Craiova. I know it may not be possible for you to come, but it would make me very happy as I owe you my life and much more. Your true and devoted friend, Count Rodolfo Dracula. Well, it is nice to know that everything turned out all right for him in the end. What about this wedding thing, then? Let's decide tomorrow. Have some more champagne? Some minutes later, there was another knock on the door, and Alfred's servant entered with another letter. Alfred opened it and looked at the name. Frankenstein. Have you heard the name Frankenstein before? Yes, I believe I have. Wasn't he that chap who created a monster? Dear Alfred Sackville Jones, something terrible has happened. There have been reports that a family of monsters, looking like the monster my grandfather created, have been seen high up in a mountain in Switzerland. I do not know whether it is a he or not. Could you please come and investigate? I have heard about your success with Count Dracula, and I want you to do the same for the Frankenstein name. Please reply as soon as possible. Yours, Albert Frankenstein. Well, it sounds pretty exciting to me. When shall we leave? Ernest, old boy. I still haven't recovered from the Dracula affair. Oh, what a spoil sport you are. Well, I won't say no. I'll decide tomorrow. Come on. Let's enjoy this champagne and go for a walk to the Tower Bridge. I do love England at this time of year, don't you?